Hi, how's it going?
I've got a welder here that I was pretty excited to check out. We'll see if that excitement survives the review, but for now I'm optimistic. I haven't used many Lincoln welders, and when I saw this new Sprinter 180 SI, I thought it could be a good value basic TIG machine. Granted, it isn't exactly cheap, but I think it compares well in terms of price to performance when compared with options from Miller and ESAB. I've done little more than take it out of the box and inspect all the accessories, and there are some signs of cost cutting, but there are also positives as well. So let's get into it. This is a dual voltage machine, and based on the specs, I'm guessing it has power factor correction, but I'll test it to find out for sure once I start welding with it. Speaking of specs, they aren't exactly industrial, but they are in line with competitive machines. It has a maximum stick output of 180 amps on 240 volts with a 25% duty cycle, and 85 amps on 120 volts with a 40% duty cycle. The TIG output is a bit higher at 200 amps on 240 volts and 110 amps on 120 volts, still with 25 and 40% duty cycles. Build quality feels pretty good, fit and finish is decent, the carry handle is rubber, and the plastic is clearly fiber reinforced. It's pretty small and light, though maybe not the smallest or lightest in this class. The power cord is about 7 feet long and decent quality, though you can see the insulation on it is a bit stiff. A typical 120 volt adapter is also included. One place where I think the cost cutting shows up a bit is the fact that it does not have a temperature controlled fan. The fan runs all the time. It's not an especially bothersome tone, but it's kinda loud. In terms of features other than the constant fan, this machine is similar to a Miller Maxstar 161 STH. The Sprinter has more output on 240 volts, though interestingly a tiny bit less output on 120 volts. The Lincoln is also far cheaper. The ESAB Rogue ET200 IP has more TIG features, and it's a couple $100 more expensive than the Sprinter. For me, the Sprinter has a good balance of features and cost. It is fairly basic, but I think it has the most important features. In stick mode, you can choose between standard and 60-10 modes, and that's it. But as long as it starts easy, runs smooth, and will run 60-10, I'm not too bothered that it doesn't have adjustable hot start and arc force. Those features are nice to have, but for the most part, I've never felt held back by a machine that didn't have them, as long as it ran okay. We'll find out soon how this machine runs. TIG mode is also very simple, but again, I think it has the stuff that's the most important. It has high frequency start, as well as lift start TIG. High frequency start is more convenient in a lot of situations, but sometimes lift start is just handy to have, and I prefer a machine to have both. It also has pulse TIG. You can't adjust on-time or background current, which are both fixed at 50%, but you can adjust the pulses per second from 0.1 up to 100. The machine also supports remote amperage control, and the TIG package does include a foot pedal. That brings me to the included accessories. The machine itself is made in Mexico, but it seems like all of the included accessories are made in the USA, and they all seem like good quality. The work clamp is stamped steel, but it seems very sturdy, and it has copper jaws and a copper strap. The electrode holder has copper alloy jaws, and they seem precise and it feels solid. The cables are only 4 gauge, but they're very good quality. They have tinned copper conductors with good quality insulation, and they're 12 feet long. The included TIG torch is a 17 style, so the head on it is fairly large, but the handle is thin, rubberized, and comfortable, and it's a flex head torch with a superflex cable. The torch came with a DINS 35 connector installed, and there was a DINS 25 connector in the box. The welder uses the 25 size connectors, so I imagine it was just cheaper to include the extra connector rather than create a separate torch SKU just for this machine, but either way, you get both. It comes with a case of torch consumables and all gas lenses, so it's not a bad setup to start with. Unfortunately, you can see one of my ceramic cups arrived broken. It's not a big deal, but maybe with these bigger cups, it would be better to pack them a different way. I don't know, this may be uncommon, so maybe it's not worth changing things. As mentioned, it also includes a foot pedal, which is fairly compact, and it is non-slip on both the bottom and the top. The TIG package also includes a nice Harrison argon flow meter and a gas hose. It also came with this little setup guide and an amperage chart, all of which is in the manual as well, but this could be handy, especially for someone just starting out. Overall, I think all the accessories are good. There's really nothing that I think you'd be pining to upgrade right away, if at all. Maybe when you're ready to get some more consumables for the TIG torch, you might get a stubby gas lens kit. But other than that, it's just all good. But now let's see if we can get this thing apart and have a look inside. Inside the machine, there is a lot to like. On this side, you can see the wind tunnel cooling setup. And there are actually two fans. There's the larger fan at the back and a smaller fan about midway in the tunnel. Overall, it's not quite as elegant as the Fronius Transpocket 180, but it's a nifty setup. It does make things more difficult to see though. The heat sinks and all the main capacitors and everything are inside the tunnel directly in the path of the airflow, which makes sense. Up in the corner, back on the board where you can just barely see, there are actually several components including capacitors and an inductor, which could just be input filtering, but I believe are probably for power factor correction. Though, once again, I will be measuring the power factor correction once I start welding, so we'll find out for sure. You can only see part of it, but it has a nice beefy main transformer as well. It might seem counterintuitive, but inverter welders still require a transformer. If a welder steps the incoming AC power directly down to welding voltages, the transformer will be operating at either 60 or 50 Hertz, depending on your location. That requires a large, heavy transformer. An inverter welder converts the incoming AC to DC and then runs that power through an inverter circuit, which switches it at very high frequency. This power, which is switching in the kilohertz range, can then be stepped down in a transformer much more efficiently, allowing them to use a smaller transformer. But it still needs one, and it does have to be large enough to handle the output current of the machine for the rated duty cycle. So a higher output machine requires a higher current capacity transformer. Just a little side tangent, but inverter welders still do need a transformer, even though they're not considered a classic transformer welder. On a separate board on the top are the points and circuitry for the high frequency start. The incoming supply ground is on a stud in the bottom of the case right here, and there is not a separate ground wire for the outer case. It is just relying on the screws to transfer that ground. But the outer case is protected quite well from coming into contact with anything that is live with the incoming AC supply. Obviously, on this side, everything is behind all this plastic shrouding. On the other side, the main circuit board is behind this inner metal frame, so it would be very unlikely for the outer case to be able to bend in and actually contact any live components. Otherwise, there isn't a whole lot to see on this side, though there are quite a few small components on the back side of the board. Overall, it seems like it's well built, I don't see any safety concerns, and it has an interesting bespoke design. I like it. So I'll get it back together and do some welding. Right off the bat, the fan is loud. I know I mentioned it, but it's loud. It still kind of fades into the background when you get into a project, but as soon as I stop focusing on my project, I'd notice the fan again. For better or worse, I made a silly mistake when recording the welding clips, so I don't actually have audio for the clips. I typically turn it way down anyway, but there it is. The power factor isn't steady at 0.95 to 0.99 like I've seen on some other machines, but it's clearly got some correction going on because it does average much higher than the 0.6 to 0.7 that machines with no correction typically have. And this shows up in the power draw as well. On 120 volts, it draws just over 20 amps in stick mode and just 14 amps when maxed out in TIG mode. Maxed out on 120 volts. Let's see how much it draws from the wall and how much it puts out. The story on 240 volts is similar. When maxed out on 240 volts, the draw in stick mode is roughly 20 amps, and it draws only around 13 amps in TIG mode, so that's very nice. In terms of output, it can output what it claims in both TIG and stick modes on both 120 volts and 240 volts. The display does show the output in real time, but it tends to be just a bit high on the display, at least according to my clamp meter. Obviously, there's a margin of error on the readings of any meter, but according to my meter, the actual output is spot on to the setting, and it's rock steady as well. To the point that I almost wondered if my meter had frozen at one point. It really is precise and well controlled. When stick welding, there is an obvious hot start. Overall starts are fine, if not always the smoothest. The machine defaults to having VRD enabled, which means that the open circuit voltage is reduced to just 14 volts. Because of the aggressive hot start, arc starts are still easy, but be aware, with the VRD on, if the metal or even the end of the rod is crusty or dirty, you'll have to scratch or tap the rod to get through the crud to get an arc started. With VRD off, the open circuit voltage is a little over 60, and it will start easier through some crud. But I left the VRD enabled most of the time and had no real issues. There's also a stuck rod detection feature where it will automatically turn the output off if it detects a stuck rod, which is nice. The Sprinter ran every rod I tried just fine, including 6010. I ran 3/32 inch and 1/8 inch Lincoln 5P Plus 6010 rods on 120 volts and 240 volts with no issues at all. Overall, the arc isn't quite the smoothest I've ever experienced, but it's quiet and relatively low spatter. And the machine ran everything from a 1/16 inch 7014 to a 5/32 inch 7018 with no fuss and no feeling like I had to mess around to get the settings just right. As long as I set the amperage vaguely appropriately, it just ran whatever. And while it's possible I just got a golden sample, I just wanted to mention again that the electrode holder's jaws are very precise, and it's just nice to use. Overall, this machine stick welds very well. The TIG arc is as smooth and quiet as any I've used. The foot pedal grips my foot and the floor well, and it doesn't slide around at all. The travel of the foot pedal isn't super long, so it may not give quite as fine of control as some others, but it's smooth, it allows starts at really low amperage, and it gives full output when bottomed out. So, all good there.
Quite definitely going to die, aren't we? I wish you'd stop saying that, shouted Ford. Well, we are, aren't we? Yes.
The Sprinter will TIG weld right down to the 10 amp minimum setting, and in fact slightly below that when using the foot pedal, which is more than low enough to weld razor blades edge to edge. And the foot pedal gives plenty of control for precise work. Even at that minimum amperage, high frequency starts are consistent and reliable. Lift start also works well. The only weakness I'd say there is with the TIG mode is that even when you are welding at just 10 amps, both the high frequency and lift start arcs have a brief instant of higher amperage. When I started the arc in the middle of the razor blades, it burned a little hole. It's not super harsh, and with a little care, it's still more than capable of welding razor blades, but that would be the main thing that I would say really separates the arc of this machine from that of machines costing far more. I mean, other than having fewer features, obviously. And I think that's the overall conclusion. This machine saves cost by being a bit light on features. The pulse mode is a bit basic, the pre and post flow are automatic, and there's no upslope and downslope sequencing, and it's DC only. Stick mode also lacks adjustability. And, as mentioned, the fan is pretty loud. But this machine doesn't skimp on build quality, arc quality, or included accessory quality. The stick mode ran whatever I threw at it with no fuss, including 6010. High-frequency TIG starts are reliable and consistent, even at the minimum amperage setting. The TIG arc is silky smooth and quiet. The included accessories are all good quality and nice to use. And the power draw is reasonable due to power factor correction. So it doesn't have very much adjustability or advanced features. But it has performance where it counts, it's an easy, nice machine to use, and it includes accessories that you won't be desperate to replace. I think that all makes it an especially good option for a first or beginner TIG machine. It's well built, it meets its performance claims, it can run on a typical 120 volt circuit without issue, it has a good warranty, and it comes with pretty much everything that you need, and it's all good. If you're in the market for a DC TIG machine, I think the Sprinter is definitely worth consideration. Hopefully that was helpful. I have a lot going on lately, so I didn't get as much welding footage as I'd have liked. So if you'd like to see more with this machine, or if there's anything else you'd like me to test out with it, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching. Take care.